What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players, by players, and all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how are you doing today?
Hey Brendan, what's going on? How's things been?
Things have been good over here. Obviously, very busy with spoiler season. It's been a crazy ride so far, but yeah, just really excited to see how these Shadow versus Light heroes play out.
Well, we're starting to see a bit of it now. Obviously, we've now seen the two Shadow heroes, one Light hero. It's all happening, right?
Yeah, except for the one that still is yet to be revealed and probably will be revealed during our podcast here. So speculations on what that is, I have no idea. I'm sitting over here with my fingers crossed for Light Wizard. I don't know about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I would obviously like to see another Arcane hero. I don't think we're going to see Light Wizard now, just based on, looking through I know other people see this as well, looking through the preview gallery and the alphabetized order of it, doesn't seem like we're going to see Wizard, but I don't know. Speculation seems to be Illusionist could be the class that comes out now. It could be a brand new class, which could be a real interesting dynamic. 3 existing classes, 1 new class.
Yeah, crushing my dreams, Bill. Well, with that, Hayden, how have you been this past week in terms of Flesh and Blood? You been playing any events?
Yeah, I was really fortunate actually. On Sunday, I was able to travel about an hour and a half out of the city to an event down south on the south coast of Sydney, Australia, to play win a cold foil legendary event. So a really big event put on by a local community member in conjunction with one of the stores. It was a sealed event into a top 8 draft for Welcome to Wraith. So played some sealed, actually managed to go 5-0 on the Swiss. My sealed deck was reasonably okay. I played kind of this grindy brute deck that had a slogism regurgitating slog win condition. And then in the top 8 actually drafted into a ninja deck. But unfortunately I had someone to my left who also went into ninja and someone 2 sets to my right that had ninja. So my deck wasn't probably as strong as I would have liked. But the top 8 was great. It was super fun. I lost in the final, but got to play a 2-time calling champion and LSS staff member Sasha Markovic in the quarterfinals and beat him. So, I'm just ticking up my tally against him. He knows what that tally is. I don't need to say it publicly. That's all right. But
yeah, you beat him so bad he had to exit the country, right?
He had to leave the next day. He just left to New Zealand the next day. He left Australia completely. So no, great event. Yeah, shout out to the Good Games Wollongong guys down there who put on that event. It was a great event. How about yourself, Brendan? What have you been playing in the past week?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to have a local event over here. They did a tournament for the Cold Foil Crazy Brew, and it was Classic Constructed. So actually a format that I haven't played since pretty much Welcome to Wraith. So I played a bit of Arcane Rising on TTS with some friends, but other than that, I wasn't into kind of like the lag when you played cross region on there. So I really haven't played the format at all. So kind of just sleeved up a dash deck that I quickly net decked from the man Hayden Dale himself, and yeah, I was able to go undefeated and win the Crazy Brew, which was nice. And then yeah, past that, I had a really, really cool event this weekend as well. Excuse me, where we did it was like US versus United Kingdom, and it was teams of 5, and it was, I guess they call it, they said it was like a Pokemon format, right? So it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So like verse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you had to lock in your position and lock in your decks. So 1 would face 1, and whoever lost would go versus 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. So this like elimination format, but you're locked in on your order and your decks. And it was a really fun format. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think if they, if the tournament organizers of this event did it moving forward, and it did maybe a 3v3 with an open team invite, I would 100% sign up for it. It was really interesting because there's a lot of game theory that goes behind a format like that. For instance, if the other team is stacking IRAs, or they'll put their best player first on IRA as like a sort of ego thing, you just put your weakest player on OTK Viscerai and then clean them out, right? It's just this weird this weird psychological game that goes on. But we ended up playing a very tame list. It was like 3 Dorinthias, 1 Kano, and 1 Bravo. And it was really close though. Went 4, so we had 1 player remaining to be eliminated, and then we eliminated them. So technically 4 or 5, right?
Ooh, yeah, really close.
Yeah, it was pretty close. We had the infamous Tower number 9 holding up the boot for us. So I was pretty confident in our ability to win. But yeah, I mean, I I thoroughly enjoyed the format. I think it's one of my favorite formats of Flesh and Blood I've ever played. And obviously, I love the team aspect. But yeah, we were able to pull through. And then the next day, they did Singapore versus Canada, and Singapore just like rolled through Canada. So yeah, so
Some
theoretically,
really good players out there.
Yeah, which is crazy because the Singapore guys, shout out to them. I don't know how much they have going on in their region in terms of like local events, but those guys, if you played international skirmish events, you know them, right? They played every single event. I think these guys were grinding like 3-4 events a weekend. They were waking up at like 2 a.m., 5 a.m. Like, I mean, it's just a different level of grind over there.
It's crazy. I mean, I woke up mid-morning for 2 skirmishes and I was done. Like, I could not keep that up. That was crazy.
Yeah, absolute monsters over there. But yeah, I mean, so theoretically, we will have a match scheduled versus Singapore to kind of decide the winner of this tournament. I know in the future they're going to add more regions as well.
It's such
I think we're holding. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's such an awesome. I mean, I love team events. That's some of my favorite formats in Magic the Gathering from back in the day. Was like team GPs, things like that. So I hope that kind of they have this idea to roll this out with other teams or other regions. And yeah, so you guys didn't play any IRA in your 5 decks?
Nope, no IRA. We just didn't feel a need for it. Obviously, like Rob and Tower number 9 are kind of, so Rob Seigel is also on my team. Those two are both Dorinthia specialists. So it was, basically no question unless we were trying to cheese with like an OTK Viserai that we were going to put them on something different than Dorinthia. Mm-hmm. For me, I just also played Dorinthia because I think the deck is, I actually think the deck is stronger than aggressive IRA. Obviously both decks can high roll, but at this point I think that over a larger sequence of games, Dorinthia probably pulls out more than IRA does.
You might be on opposite sides there.
Yeah, and the Dorinthia mirror is actually very technical as well, and it's you can win it quite consistently if you're the better player. Obviously, there is Dorinthia doing Steelblade Supremacy, Iron Tongue Termination, or in my case, this is not actually why I lost the game, but I did play against the Dorinthia who took 11 damage on turn 1, and then Glint the Quicksilver and 20 bladed me. And it was funny because it's actually Sharif. He's like a fantastic player from the UK. I played him in skirmish quite a few times. But we just we have a lot of respect for each other. So we talk out everything that's going on while we're playing. And I was like, I literally said this to you. I was like, wow, the only way someone takes 9 damage on turn 1 is if they have Glint Twinning plus Steelblade. And then he plays Steelblade and I just immediately doubt myself and start doing the math. I'm like, it's so unlikely he has that. And I don't play around it, and I just get just absolutely blown out.
Taken to town, yeah.
It was hilarious. But yeah, I really hope that that's a format that gets pushed. It works very, very well in Flesh and Blood, especially because we do have decks like OTK Viserai that can just almost 100% beat IRA. It really makes people think about what they're playing, or they have their players positioned in the lineup. And there's just so much that goes into it. It's a fantastic format.
That's awesome. Yeah, meta calls and mind games going on.
Yeah, absolutely. But enough of that. It's time for a bit of news from around the world of Wraith, from the Savage Lands to Metrics. Let's recap what's been happening in Flesh and Blood this past week.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Hayden.
Yeah, so we're already into, as you said, week 2 of previews, pre-releases next week. We've now, as we said at the top of the show, seen 3 heroes. We're likely going to see the 4th hero today. We assume at this point it's going to be a light class, right, Brendan? Yeah,
we do assume, but I think a lot of us, like we said earlier, a lot of us were on Light Warrior. I know, sorry, not Light Warrior, but Light Wizard, and maybe considering Light Guardian now. But I would it'd be quite a surprise to see an Illusionist. Maybe if that's the form of light wizard that we get. But yeah, I mean, a whole entire new class would kind of be a surprise and kind of be a good kind of encore finale to top this off.
Yeah, I mean, at least through the previous season we've seen so far, not afraid to throw a couple of surprises in there, and whatever we think, they usually kind of, they throw a number of surprises there to catch us off guard. Yeah,
and just to talk about what's been spoiled so far. So obviously we have Chane, and then we got Ser Boltyn, the Light Warrior, and this one has been absolutely hilarious to watch on the Discord in Card Reveals chat. So Warrior is a pretty funny class because When it comes to like the community perception in Flesh and Blood, it'd probably be considered like a low skill floor, but at the same time, it's coupled with being extremely hard to play against, right? So the class actively, punishes an opponent for not knowing exactly how to block, and on top of that, warrior decks are generally pretty easy to build, and there's not much nuance. So as a result, we see warrior as a very represented class in underdeveloped metas, which is probably what we should assess our current situation as, with not so many players in the game quite yet. We haven't had a massive like hive mind of deck building to kind of figure out the meta. So like we'll see like early into metas, like obviously back in Welcome to Wraith, the initial deck was tall warrior, right? Like every week you would see on Reddit or on YouTube, like, oh, I 7-0'd my locals with this warrior deck, and it was just packed full of reactions and all this. But yeah, I mean, people see warrior because in North America as well, it's very, very popular in skirmish. So they saw this light warrior, and like the reactions were, I would say they were a bit in between. Most people just kind of being like, oh my gosh, I'm burning my first edition, like all these crazy things. Obviously not, they're being hyperbolic, but it's funny to see, because I think that a lot of people perceive warrior as a very kind of a very meta dominating class, right? Not allowing them to play their Azealia deck or play their their funky deck that tries to pull off this combo. But yeah, it's been quite a ride for the Discord conversations.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing, is what then comes next. Are people going to get really hyped up by the last class to kind of balance that out a bit, or I'm sure warrior players are absolutely thrilled right now. For me, Ser Boltyn feels very different to Dorinthia in a lot of ways. So this addition of the soul is so different. So we're gonna jump in and talk a bit more about Ser Boltyn and Chane in particular. Obviously, we covered a bit more of Levia last week. We're not gonna go too deep into cards as much this week. We're going to take a bit more of a macro view and focus on what's happening with these classes overall, their play styles, sort of some of the key callouts to us, and how we might expect to see these classes play out through the start of constructed season as well. And one of the reasons for that as well is that next week, Brendan and myself, we're going to jump into a bit of a special episode of the pod where we're going to do a limited set review of Monarch. So we're going to be talking through all the commons and rares in the set, class by class, and just how we give a bit of an insight, I guess, or our sort of thoughts before people jump to pre-release. So if you're heading to pre-release next weekend, want to know maybe what classes to attack to try and take out your local pre-release, then be sure to check out next week's pod, because that's what we're going to focus on.
Yep, I think that'll be a great one to kind of prime yourself for picking up that pre-release prize, winning locals, all that kind of stuff. It's just going to be a great resource. But just circling back to news, I just want to bring up a little kind of funny little thing that happened this weekend in the Fab Gauntlet. We actually had a winner in the form of, well, not in the form of, but it was a guy named Alexander Vor. And this this is kind of a story for the ages in terms of Gauntlet. So Alexander actually wasn't able to play the week prior because his cards, like he needed to buy all of the cards, and when they were shipped to him, they were delayed. So he showed up to the finals. We didn't spectate any of his games, right? He showed up to the finals, and he has a portrait mode camera, and I'm like, oh, man. And then he's playing on 2 pieces of printer paper, and he's using Nerf darts to track the resource on his tunic. And this guy, I mean, it was the most hilarious setup I've ever seen in my life. And then he takes out Jason Thompson-Sheck, very popular warrior player from New Zealand, in the finals. So very well played, but I mean, that setup, I'm never going to forget it. It was absolutely ridiculous.
And Brendan, what's so the Gauntlet? Can you just recap for everyone just what the Gauntlet is and how that works as well, just in case we've got new listeners this week and they're not familiar with the Discord Gauntlet?
Yeah, so Fab Gauntlet is a weekly tournament hosted by the Flesh and Blood TCG community Discord. We do Blitz, generally Blitz. We'll probably switch over to Classic Constructed after Monarch, but we do a webcam format, usually 5 to 6 rounds, cut the top 8. And we have people from all over the world compete. A lot of North America, but then we've also, like I said before, a few people from New Zealand, Australia. And yeah, it's just a great place to play if you're looking to play casually, or if you're definitely looking to play competitively, this is the place to do it. And with that, I mean, so these past 2 weeks we've done win a case. There was $10 entry, win a case. But moving forward, we're going to switch over to $5 entry and then win a box and raffle a box. We wanted to move to like the raffle system to kind of encourage more players to come compete that maybe didn't think they had a great chance of winning, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite. I've played in this Fab Gauntlet a couple of times. Luckily now, actually, no, just once. I wasn't able to play last week when I wanted to. But it's such a great way to meet some new players who you don't, you're not going to interact with locally because of where they are regionally and geographically. And compete for this first prize, the Discord Gauntlet Champ, weekly champ, plus the box. But get in and enter, play, get some experience, and you could still be in with a chance to win something, right? I think it's a great change in format that you guys have gone with it.
Yeah, the whole idea behind Gauntlet is that I know this isn't really the case in New Zealand and Australia, but a lot of us in North America, specifically in the United States, where we're starting to open up, we have very underdeveloped local scenes. So we have these players that have gone from grinding skirmishes and playing the best players in the world every single weekend, right? To now that's not really on the table anymore. And like if we go to our locals, you have players that have maybe put in 100 or 1,000 hours into Flesh and Blood, kind of teaching people the game or playing people who are new or more casual. And I think that skirmish was just a really good kind of pilot to show that people want this sort of competition. And I think there should be like a place every single week where people can come and compete against the best players in the world. And that's the whole idea behind our prizing and everything, is we just want to attract the top level talent, so people can, who want to put in more time, who are at the higher level, can keep getting better and, testing their skills. And at the same time, we put on, this is all streamed to Twitch, we cast it, we put it on YouTube. So we also want to use it as a way to kind of bring the community together and, have a place just for everyone to play. But yeah.
Awesome.
All right, so let's head over to the main topic of the pod. Hayden, why don't you tell us what we have on the menu?
Yeah, definitely. So as kind of just alluded to in the news section there, this week we're focusing on a bit more of a macro perspective on two of the new heroes that we've already seen in the form of Ser Boltyn, the new light warrior hero, and Chane, Shadowbound, who's the new Shadow Runeblade hero. So yeah, what do we expect from these two classes in their playstyle as they enter into Constructed? What do we think will be most important to these two classes? Card-wise, deck structure-wise. What we've seen already with other heroes in Flesh and Blood is there's not just one way to play a hero, right? So, what do we expect to see from these heroes? I think now we're moving into, just get into it a little bit. We're moving to no longer just having to worry about your deck and your life as a resource. You're now having to worry about your banish zone for the shadow class talents. You're having to worry about your soul for the light talents as another area of resource to balance. So what are your kind of thoughts, I guess, Brendan? Let's just jump straight into it. What do you think are some of the ways that, or the challenges players are going to have with these new classes, or these new heroes?
So I think like the TLDR is going to be like the game is just getting much, much more complicated. So I've actually been able to get my hands on, playing Chane in some online simulators this week, both with Hayden and some other people over here in North America. And I have to say, like, Shadow Runeblade is probably one of the most complex classes to date when it comes to correctly sequencing your turns. So knowing when to create shackles and get go again, and if you're playing Constructed, using Grasp to get that rune chant at an effective time. There's just so much depth to like the sequencing and how you're playing out your turns. And then on top of all of this, you have to balance creating the shackles to get go again and fueling your attacks, right? Because those are also going to be putting cards into your bench so that you can play out of there. But at the same time, that's also potentially killing you and milling your decks. If we're talking about limited as well, like you're rapidly reducing the amount of cards in your deck. You could be putting cards that don't have blood debt in your banish zone that you can't play, and then you're just ripping basically the threats out of your deck. So it's this crazy class to play so far. But Boltyn, on the other hand, I haven't had much time to play other than, kind of goldfishing like a bad deck that I put together. But I think that contrary to what a lot of people will think, because he's a warrior, he's actually incredibly complex and much more nuanced than the tall warrior per se strategies we're used to at this point. Mm-hmm. As Boltyn, you're trying to manage, charging cards into your soul, and then using your soul to use his ability to give your attacks go again, or, play like a Celestial Cataclysm. So this soul area is like a whole nother resource that you're going to have to be investing into And we've already seen with shadow cards, there's going to be cards that punish you for stacking that soul. So it's not an untouchable resource as well. So there's just so much going on there to try to unpack. But yeah, and then like just one other funny thing that I've noticed with both shadow and light is that so the soul area goes under the hero, right? And your banished zone is obviously in the same place, but the way we've been kind of trying to manage this on some of the simulators we've been using is like in the banished zone we'll separate into like three groups, right? You have the banishes that are whiffs, right? They're not blood debt cards, you can't play them, they're stuck there. Then we have cards in group 2, cards that are in the banished zone that are going to tick blood debt that you can't get out, right? You're always going to take damage from them. And then group 3 is like the cards you can actually play out of blood debt. So this banished zone is kind of expanded into 3 separate zones. And then the soul, on the other hand, like you have all the cards under your hero, but like what is that going to look like on the playmat? Because right now we're like just putting them out below the hero or something, and like it's funny to me to see how players will adapt and like try to play with this. But yeah, with these new zones, they're on a traditional playmat, what we're used to for Flesh and Blood. It's like it demands like a whole new system. It seems like.
I'm sure everyone will have their own sort of nuanced way to go about that for sure. So as Brendan said, maybe these 2 new heroes and their talents are difficult to unpack, but we're going to try and do it right now. So let's just go straight in with Chane, Bound by Shadow. So for those that might not have seen Chane Bound by Shadow yet, Chane is a Shadow Runeblade hero and has a once per turn action effect. Create a Soul Shackle token, and then it says your next Runeblade or Shadow action this turn gains Go Again, and that gains Go Again. So you create a Soul Shackle token, and then you give your next Shadow or Runeblade action Go Again. And then these Shackle tokens that it makes, if you also haven't seen these, so the Soul Shackle token says it's an aura. It stays in the arena, so it's a Shadow Runeblade token aura. At the beginning of your action phase, banish the top card of your deck. So start of your turn, however many Soul Shackle tokens you're accumulating, you have to banish that many cards. So as Brendan said before, when you get into playing this hero, you can obviously use Shane's ability every turn, but every time you use that ability, that's another card that's going to be banished from your top of your deck exponentially at the start of your turn. So you start getting up to 4 or 5 Soul Shackle tokens. That's 4 or 5 cards at the start of your turn off the top of the deck. You can, if they're blood debt cards, that's damage that you're potentially facing, life loss, or it's cards that you're no longer going to be able to play if they're not blood debt cards, if they're just banished forever. So there's some real intricacies with what Chane does. And have you experienced that so far? I know you just said, Brendan, you've played a little bit with Chane. Have you decked out? Have you run out of cards? Have you died to blood debt yet?
Mm-hmm. So I've only played Chane in like a pseudo constructed format, right? So we're playing with 60 cards. So I haven't yet decked out. Mostly because I'm either dying to my opponent or killing my opponent before then, because we both have janky decks, so we're playing against kind of a like a gauntlet deck per se. So we play against like warrior, like a common constructed deck, just to kind of be like our test for is this deck viable. In which case the warrior usually just kills us for playing Chane at this point. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because right, you're going to want to be using those Soul Shackles to get Go Again. You also just want to create them so that you can get stuff into the Banished Zone, because you want to utilize your Banished Zone to play hands that are larger than 4 cards or 5 cards, and that's going to be how you do it. So on the first turn, there's like this weird situation where I think you want to start creating Soul Shackles almost off the bat, just start fueling your turns as you progress through the game. But then if you stack up to like 4 or 5, if you get some of those, it depends how your deck is built, but let's say you have like Howl from Beyond or Pierce the Shadow Eyes. These are both cards with blood debt that cost 2. Those can really get stuck in your blood debt zone, and you can just get, because if you like, let's say you get 4 off the top, right? And there's 2 1 costs and 2 2 costs. Those 2 costs generally kind of get stuck there, and then there's 4 more coming off the top, and just kind of keep stacking. And yeah, when you get to these 5 or 6, yeah, exactly.
Your debt is stacking up. It's mounting. Your debt is mounting. The interest is coming and knocking, and you got to pay. And you got to pay in the form of life.
Yeah,
it's definitely the blood debt aspect in the Banished Zone. It's, as you say, it's a resource, right? You can use it as extra cards in your hand effectively. If you say you have, let's take 2 Soul Shackle maybe as like a baseline. If you have 2 cards every turn that you're banishing, and you can play those 2 cards, you can look at that and go, wow, I'm playing with a 6 to 7 card hand every turn. Great. But at some point, you're going to need to or you're going to want to be able to give go again to these cards by using more Soul Shackle tokens, right? You're almost sitting there going, well, to get the full effect of these cards, I need to get go again. Maybe because I've had to defend out the cards in my hand, or I just don't have ways to give it go again. And then you accumulate even more Soul Shackle and even more cards into your banish at the start of the turn. So that it is really, you've got it's a balance, right? It's a cost. And the one thing is that this is public information. Those cards sitting there and you're banished, your opponent knows those, and they can try and punish you for that as well by either being really aggressive on their turns, forcing you to defend with cards out of hand and potentially not have resources to be able to play those cards on your turn. So the whole banish side of it with Chane and the blood debt aspect just adds extra layer, not just for yourself but for your opponent as well. It's another set of information to process and play the game with.
Yeah, and it's funny how that works too with the open information, right? The opponent can kind of see your attacks face up, like what could potentially come at them. But then if you have a card like Pierce the Shadow Vise, right? It gets +2 if they've taken arcane damage. Say you're playing Constructed and you have the Grasp available. If you are able to make a rune chant before, some kind of diddly attack that does 2 or does 3, does go again, right? Your opponent was gonna have to pitch for that rune chant if they don't want Pierce the Shadow Vise to come in for 6 or for 5 or something huge. And it's just like this weird mind game where they're like, do I pitch now and go down to a 3-card hand versus this because he could go really wide and I won't be able to block, and then he's gonna maybe swing with Nebula Blade and create another rune chant. There's just so much going on there. But yeah, Hayden, I know we had some thoughts on Chane initially on like what cards we thought were good. But after getting your hands on the class and playing with it a bit, like what cards are you up on and what cards are you down on?
Yeah, so I think there's a few cards that I was surprised about are a lot better than I thought, and some cards that I've been less than excited about. And I think there's a couple of things to that. It's I said it at kind of the top of this section is that there's often multiple ways to build a class in Flesh and Blood. In fact, there is multiple ways to build a class in Flesh and Blood, and I think the initial approach I took to Chane when I look at this is a pretty aggressive build that wants to use Soul Shackle to start getting some extra cards, as a resource, right? And then kind of max out at 4 or 5 and just be playing these attacks every turn, being pretty aggressive, playing a lot of blood debt cards that can be played from banish. So that's for that reason, a card like Dimensional Crossroads was one that I was, really surprised about how good that card felt. So, if you haven't seen Dimensional Crossroads, it's a Shadow Runeblade aura. Dimensional Gateway, is the card I'm talking about. Apologies. So Dimensional Gateway is a 1-cost Shadow Runeblade action. It says, so this is the red version, opt 3, look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may put any of those cards on the top bottom, of course, as op works, and then reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a Runeblade card, you deal 1 arcane damage to each opposing hero, and if it's a Shadow card, you can also banish it. You may banish it. Go again. So this almost to me, I looked at this card and was a little bit underwhelmed to start with, but effectively what this card gives you with the Gateway is, look at the top card of your, look at the top 3 cards, find a card with blood debt that can be played from banished. Leave that on top, flip it over, deal an arcane damage, you banish that card, and that's a card you can actually play this turn as well. So it's almost like being able to draw 1 of 3 cards from the top of your deck with opt, or 2 with yellow, 1 with blue, etc. So that's a card I've been really surprised about, for instance. I know you've played with that card a little bit, Brendan. Do you feel the same, or you're not so hot on that card?
I was 100% the same. So I actually spoiled that card, and I was like, okay. Like, Runeblade needs opt. Like, Runeblade has wanted opt for a while with, like, Tome of the Arknight, and that immediately that's where my brain went. It was like, okay, we can now tome more effectively. We can probably play Sutcliffe's research notes a bit more effectively. And then once I got my hands on the cards, like, this Dimensional Gateway was like one of the best cards in the deck. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, you're just fueling that banish zone. And then the 1 arcane damage as well is super significant because, like we talked about, if you have Pierce the Shadow Vise in the banish zone, I've got a pitch to block that now, or that Pierce is getting +2. And it's just brutal. And not only that, but I know when I've been playing Chane, I've actually been playing with Nebula Blade so far. So that Dimensional Gateway is turning Nebula Blade on to get the +3. So now Nebula Blade is going to come in for 4 and threaten to create a rune chant on hit. And these values are really hard to deal with. Like, you're coming in for 1 arcane, I got to pitch to block that. Or you're coming in for 4 attack, now I have to block with 2 cards, or block with defense reaction, and use armor. And Chane actually does this a lot, where he's coming in for these really awkward values, and they'll have on hit effects and stuff like this. And it's a lot to deal with on the other side of the board.
Yeah, on the Gateway piece, the other card, and this is another card that I've found to be really impactful in these decks, is the Rift. So what is that? Riftbind, sorry. So Riftbind is a Shadow Rune Blade action attack. The red one costs 1, it attacks for 3, defends for 3. It says you may play Riftbind from Banish Zone. So, again, if you can get this off Gateway, you can put it into your Banish and play it that turn or for future turn. It also says if you do, it gains plus X attack, where X is the number of non-attack action cards you've played this turn, and it has Blood Debt. So already, if you play a Gateway into banishing this, or you banish it off a Soul Shackle token at the start of the turn, you've already got a 1-cost attack for 4, and that's before you even start thinking about other Runeblade non-attack action cards that you could play. I know you've probably played around with this card a little bit. What did you think of it, Brendan? Riftbind?
Yeah, I think Riftbind is super good. Obviously, when it comes off, when it's banished at red, like you're just kind of thinking like, oh man, how many non-attack actions is he playing this turn? And I don't have to deal with this card. It's just a great card to play out of the banish zone. For me, I thought that it was going to be good when I saw it. And it has pretty much lived up to that power level. If I can quickly segue to one card I was very down on that I think is actually very good, is going to be Seeds of Agony. I thought that card I thought that card was borderline terrible. Like I was like, oh man. But playing a 0 cost out of the banish zone that's going to be a non-attack action, and it's also going to ping your opponent for 1 arcane damage is so relevant, it's ridiculous. And if you even want to consider playing Eclipse and creating the Ursa token, that's how you're doing it.
Yeah, maybe just to quickly recap. So Seeds of Agony, that's the Shadow Rune Blade action, non-attack action. It says you may play Seeds of Agony from your banish zone. And the next attack action card with cost 1 or less, so this is for yellow, you play this turn, gains deal 1 arcane damage to target hero, and it has Go Again, has Blood Debt, and it costs 0. And it's a cycle. So the red is 2 or less that you play, and the blue is 0 or less. So yeah, as Brendan says, if you play a red one of these or a yellow one of these into one of your attack actions, you've already played an attack action to turn something like Riftbind on. Plus you're throwing that one sort of ping of arcane damage their way, which could turn on those cards like Vice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the card is it's so good. Maybe only in yellow and red, but I was definitely surprised at how much I was wrong on that one so far, right? There's still so much to be kind of explored here. But another card that I think both you and I thought was amazing on first look and is amazing in play is going to be Shadow of Ursa. So Shadow of Ursa is a majestic, so it's a blue 0 cost. It says you may play Shadow of Ursa from your banish zone. As an additional cost to play Shadow of Ursa, you may banish a card with Blood Debt. If you do, Shadow of Ursa gains Go Again, and then Shadow of Ursa has Blood Debt, and it attacks for 2 and blocks for 3. So you're thinking is like, oh yeah, you come in for 2 with Go Again. That's not that incredible. But what Shadow of Ursa does is you can banish something like Bounding Demigon, and then play it from your banish zone. So Bounding Demigon, for instance, will get +1 when played from that zone. So there are these cards that will gain, on hit, or not on hit, but like they'll become more effective when they are played from that zone. And Shadow of Ursa is kind of enabling that synergy per se.
Yeah, Shadow of Ursa I think is such an interesting card because 2 of the things that I found challenging for Chane so far is the ability to get Go Again outside of creating a Soul Shackle token with Shane's ability, which, as we know, can sometimes mount up, these costs or these blood debts that you cannot pay in the future. And the other piece is drawing blood debt cards into your hand that actually aren't good to draw. So, we just talked about Seeds of Agony, and I agree, I also really like that card a lot. But drawing that card isn't very good. It doesn't feel like you get the value out of it when you draw it. It's just it's not as good, right, as when you can play this for free and then start stacking up cards on top of it. But what Shadow of Ursa allows you to do, right, is turn some of these cards that you draw into a Go Again and still be able to play them, right? So you get this extra value out of your blood debt cards by banishing something like a Seeds of Agony or a Demigon. You still get to play that card because it has blood debt and can be played from banish zone. But you also get this Go Again. So you're going even wider with your attacks. You get these Go Agains that are otherwise, to be honest, a little bit difficult to gain. That's probably one of the most difficult things with Chane is getting this, regular Go Again at a low cost.
Yeah, 100%. And that card has performed pretty much how I expected it to, and even more. So, kind of circling back to what you said, how there is multiple decks. There's always multiple decks for a single hero, right? Multiple archetypes per se. So we talk about this kind of more aggro-oriented Chane that's looking to go wide and swing out a bunch of attacks. But let's circle back to the card that you spoiled, Hayden, and that's going to be Dimensional Crossroads. If we're talking about build around, this seems like kind of the quintessential signpost that's telling us to do something. So just to kind of circle back, Dimensional Crossroads is a majestic, so it's a yellow 2 cost, and it reads, go again. Whenever you play an attack action card or a non-attack action card from your banish zone, if you haven't played another card of that type this turn, deal 1 arcane damage to target hero. If you lose life during your turn, so that would be blood debt, presumably, destroy Dimensional Crossroads. So Hayden, when you were playing that aggro deck, was it easier to dodge the blood debt than you expected?
Yeah, it was. It was. I think over some of the first few sort of games where we played out these Chane style decks in a more aggressive manner, up until the end of the game, I was probably only taking max 1 damage. And sometimes you can actually build your turns or structure your turns to prevent that damage, so you don't have to take the blood debt. Ensure you get the cards out. So Dimensional Crossroads, for instance, was a card that we spoiled it. I wasn't super sure about how this card would play out, mostly because we hadn't seen a lot of the cards you could play from Banish at the time. I think we'd seen, like the Tome of Torment, maybe one other card. But as we've seen more and more cards come out during previous season that can be played from Banish, Dimensional Crossroads just to me keeps getting stronger and stronger. I'm not, and going back to the thing you said about, and I'd said about playstyles of decks, I don't know if this fits into every Chane playstyle. I don't know if this is an auto-include. But there's definitely ways you can build around this card. I mean, as you say, it's a little bit of a signpost. It's a majestic. Clearly wants you to play cards from Banish and reward you for doing that by stacking up this arcane damage. And incidental sources of arcane damage, they add up and they force your opponent to make decisions about their cards, about their resources. Do they pitch a card to start preventing this damage, which is then one less card they can either defend actual attack actions with or use on their turn. So it's a card that I think has a lot of upside. Have you thought of ways maybe to use this card to its fullest extent yet?
Yeah, so the only thing that's preventing me from putting this card in almost every Chane deck I play is the cost. So 2 is a bit expensive. But like Hayden said, in the first, even the early, the mid game, I think everything outside of the late game, unless you want to keep something in your banish zone, you can pretty much clear it every single time, which is really interesting. Unless, of course, you're playing like Husk. I think it's Carrion Husk is the name. The legendary armor that once you block with it, it goes to your banish zone and will take the blood debt. But I thought that this card would be very hard to play, and you'd have to play like some sort of super dirtily controlled deck that only banishes a card every so often. That's definitely not the case. I think that you can get 5+ damage out of getting one of these things down before it goes away very, very easily. And at that rate, I think Dimensional Crossroads we're gonna be seeing in constructed for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. I kind of felt the same, to be honest. I thought it was going to be this really heavy build around card, but the more that I see the cards come out, and the more that play a few games with some of these cards as much as possible, it just doesn't feel like that's necessary at all. It feels like you can get 1, maybe even 2 of these into play, and just start to be really proactive about the way you use your banish zone and getting these cards out. Ideally you don't want to be taking any blood damage. With Levia, you've got a way to suppress that by getting a 6 attack into your banish zone for the turn, and you avoid that blood debt. But with Chane so far, we don't have that, so you don't want to be stacking cards up in your banish anyway, because that's just life you're paying. So you do mostly want to be clearing your banish zone every turn, unless you are setting up a future really really aggressive or quite a big turn.
Mm-hmm. And Hayden, I have a question for you. Now that we're on the topic of Chane, I think this is the spiciest and most controversial question. So obviously it depends on your deck, but initial thoughts: Galaxy Black, Dread Scythe, or Nebula Blade,
or Reaping Blade, right?
Yeah, or Reaping Blade. There's 4.
We have 4 weapons to choose from. Yeah, look, I think for me so far, just the way my mind goes through how I think Chane should be played, or how I think I want to play Chane out so far. Obviously, it's very dependent on how people want to build their decks and what strategy they want to take. Nebula Blade has kind of stood out to me as the one that I feel is probably the weapon I want to start with. And a big part of that is really cards like Gateway. Dimensional Gateway has been a real surprise to me in what that card can do. So, I'm thinking about turn structure when I think about weapons. Like, how am I going to utilize my weapon to its fullest extent. So with Nebula Blade, I'm thinking, okay, I see these turns where I'm playing like a Dimensional Gateway or a Seeds of Agony to turn on Nebula Blade, plus, an attack action with Go Again or whatever it might be, and then into Nebula Blade. And because it's 4 damage and also presents an on-hit effect to get that rune chant, another piece of incidental arcane damage, I'm really high on that ability. 4 is such a important number, as we know, in Flesh and Blood. So I'm thinking about Nebula Blade to start, but I also think, there's a lot of blues in the Shadow class, Rune Blade, and across just Shadow cards that are really effective. So the Scythe also stands out to me as obviously a new majestic weapon. Could be really, something to really explore with Chane going forward.
Yeah, I think in the deck's infancy, when we first started experimenting with Chane as a class and Shadow Rune Blade as a class and the cards, it's Nebula Blade is sort of the easiest one to build around. I think to sort of figure out the power behind Galaxy Black or Dread Scythe, it's going to take some time. But, with that, I want to talk about cards outside of Monarch. What were some of the, the first cards that you thought to include in your Chane deck, and what stood out?
I mean, there's immediately one that comes to mind, and it's come to mind for a lot of people, I think, based on some of the prices these cards I've seen on the secondary market. I'm going to give you one guess, Brendan, about what card was first included in my Chane deck.
So I'm going to close my eyes. I'm visualizing myself in the desert. There's a sandstorm coming, and a giant face is coming towards me. Is that? Am I getting close?
Yeah, it sounds right. Do you know what this art reminds me of? Is if you've ever seen the movie Scorpion King with The Rock.
I have. Yeah. Of course, it's a classic.
Yeah, it's an instant classic, right? There's a scene where like The Rock's kind of face comes out from the sand just like that as the Scorpion King. It is, of course, Art of War. Art of War is a card from Arcane Rising that's seen some play in certain decks, more so in aggressive decks like Katsu. But the ability, or I guess the cost for the draw 2 cards on Art of War is banish card, right? Which has always been a cost. But now, with Chane and with Levia, where we can use the banish as almost an extension to our hand, we can. It's not a cost anymore. We can banish something like a Demigon or an Ursa or whatever it is that can be played from your banish zone. Draw 2 more cards into our hand. Plus, Go Again, as I said, as a real, I guess, a part that's difficult for Chane to drive easily. So give you next attack, Go Again. Banish a card that can be played from banish. Draw 2 cards. That is a lot of power coming out of one card in the form of Art of War.
Yeah, I mean, playing Fjendalspring Tunic and using the resource off of that to play Art of War, banish Shadow over Ursa, or banish Seeds of Agony, draw 2 cards, get Go Again. It's just so hilariously good. It's just like automatically you're thinking, this is what I want in my deck. But obviously, Art of War also comes at the cost of being an instant that doesn't block. Mm-hmm. Is that something we're going to be wanting to do in Chane? We'll have to see.
Yeah, like all of these cards add up, right? You can't, at the end of the day, you can't be going, okay, I'm going to play this, I'm going to play the, things like Mutated, the Mass, these cards that don't defend, or Seeds of Agony, for instance, only defends for 2. These add up. And that was actually one of the problems, I think, with that Viscerai had, is all of your non-attack actions defend for 2. So it kind of felt like you wanted to build this aggressive deck to mitigate that factor. You didn't want to be defending with those cards. You wanted to be actively using those cards on your turn. So I feel that that's where we'll start with Chane. Where we'll end up is hard to say. But I think Art of War. Is there any cards for you, Brendan, outside of Monarch that you're excited to try, or you think could be good in Chane?
Yeah, so the first thing that I kind of went to was Rune Skies, just to get that Go Again. Obviously, the on-hit effect and getting the rune chant is super important as well, because turning on things like Pierce the Shadow Eyes is just generally good, right? But getting the Go Again out of Rune Skies seems like it could be an include in the deck. I think when we started, I had anywhere between, I think it was like 5 to 8 of them. And I don't think that that's the play, right? I don't think I want all of those 2 blocks. I think I'd rather have like Dimensional Gateways, most likely. But I do think Rune Skies will end up in some of the earlier conceptions of the deck. Yeah. So I'm really excited to see how Chane plays out. I think that right now, with 3 classes spoiled, he's going to me, he's speaking to me as the hardest to play in Limited. I think Unlimited is going to have immense power, but also kind of be a big trap because you're going to you're going to be thinking you can create more Soul Shackle tokens, and maybe you should, and probably decking yourself pretty quickly. With that said, you sit something in your blood debt zone that you can't get out either because you're blocking, you don't have the resources, just a myriad of reasons. You're just going to be killing yourself. So there's so many ways you can just play Chane incorrectly that makes him so hard, right? But that's what's crazy about Monarch is that every hero is like that. Like the complexity of this limited format is just leaps and bounds ahead of Welcome to Wraith or Arcane Rising. Like I'm even looking at Ser Boltyn, the warrior class, what some people would call the noob class, right? The one that's supposed to be easy. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, how am I going to do this? Like, how am I going to go again and swinging with these weapons and charging my soul and all this stuff to manage? It's super exciting.
100%. One of the things we've seen through the first few sets is there's not necessarily ways you can kill yourself. Your opponent's got to do it. But, now we've got ways where you can do the job yourself if you're not careful. There's going to be trial and error about how to build these decks, how to play these decks, what the strategy looks like so that you actually get the most out of it, but don't just end up losing the game to your own blood debt or to running out of cards in your deck. So it's going to be super interesting to see what happens once we start to get into the constructed format. The default sort of, I guess, Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising heroes are still going to be prevalent in a massive way because a lot of those decks are tuned to a reasonable extent, and a lot of those heroes people know how to play already. So it's a lot easier to just go back to something than to try and pick something completely new up and understand how that works and put the time and effort into it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope people do that.
Before we, yeah, I know, right? But before we go over to Light Warrior, I do want to ask you, Hayden, how many times have you cast Eclipse? How many times have you summoned Ursa onto the board? This epic ally.
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, the legendary of the class for the set. A grand total of 0 times is how many times I've done it so far. Brendan, what about yourself?
Grand total of 0 as well, and not for a total lack of trying. I was trying to do Blasphemet the other night on Levia. Found that quite hard as well. Maybe it needs to be enabled with quickly enabled with her specialization card at rare. The soul, I think it's called Soul Harvest.
Yeah.
The one that lets you put all of those back into your banish zone. But yeah, not easy to cast at all. Not easy to cast at all. One thing that's funny about Doomsday in particular, so Eclipse, which is the Shadow Runeblade one, can actually be played out of banish zone. So if you get into banish early, it's not bad at all. On Levia's side, if you have Doomsday, that card you cannot cast it unless you have the 6 cards in your blood debt. So if you park that in Arsenal, big noob trap by the way, I did it myself because I'm dumb. It's stuck. It's not going anywhere. It's just so rough. But yeah, these legendary specialization cards, we'll have to see what people kind of come up with for decks that are able to cast this, because right now I can see that it's not going to be something that comes super organically. Like it's definitely a deck building challenge.
Oh, almost definitely. Like it's not just, okay, I doodle along, I finally draw my Eclipse or my Doomsday and just, throw it down on the table and get my my nice token. Not at all. Like you have to build to set this up, I think. So yeah, they're powerful cards and the tokens are really, strong and will have impacts on games. But you've got to find a way to get there first.
Yeah. And with that, let's head over to everybody's favorite class. All right, maybe just a select few people. So Light Warrior, we saw Ser Boltyn, Breaker of Dawn spoiled. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what he does?
Yeah, so now we've seen Ser Boltyn, Breaker of Dawn, our first Light Warrior hero. And Ser Boltyn says, if you've charged this turn, attacks you control have +1 while defended by an attack action card. And also says attack reaction. Banish a card from Ser Boltyn's soul, target attack with greater than its base attack gains go again. So a couple of things here. So charge is a keyword that is new to the set, to Monarch, obviously. Charge is basically you put a card from your hand into your soul face up. So that's the action of charging. And then with the attack reaction on Boltyn as well, on Ser Boltyn, so banish a card from Ser Boltyn's soul. So you can then take charge card from soul to give an attack attack with greater than its base attack go again, and you can do that as many times one turn. That's not a once per turn effect, so that's really worth noting. Is that Ser Boltyn, if you can start to stack up your soul by charging these cards into it, you're going to be able to set up these pretty big turns where you can give a lot of your attacks go again. What are your kind of, I guess, first initial thoughts on Ser Boltyn when you saw it, Brendan?
So I love it, and I love it because we're seeing a warrior that's it's not just trying to smack face every turn and do the max amount of damage, right? Like what we'll see with like Dorinthia and to an extent Kasai is like I'm just throwing everything at you. I'm like playing my hand. I'm not even thinking about the late game, and I'm just going for the kill. Ser Boltyn does not look like that at all. This class, I mean, he looks very, very complicated, managing that soul zone and being able to use his attack reaction. So you have to have charged before that. Like there's multiple things going on here. You're going to be trying to charge, play a card that lets you charge, then have go again on that card, then come in with another threat, and then use those cards you put into soul from charging to use his ability to attack, react, and get go again. I mean, it's very complex. Is my first reaction.
Yeah, I think so we talked about playstyle, right, of Chane, and is that like an aggressive playstyle? Is there like a more of a kind of controlling playstyle there? So Boltyn almost has all of this kind of playstyle into one. I really see the early game as, you're trying to charge your soul. You're trying to gather your troops and your resources early on by charging that soul. And then as you get into the mid to late game, all these, your soul's amassed. You've got these great cards in Ser Boltyn and Light Warrior that then allow you to set up these really big turns by using that soul to your advantage, either by using the attack reaction off Ser Boltyn, or actually as an additional cost on some cards, as we've already seen. So, something like Beacon of Victory, which is a Light Warrior attack reaction that's, it's cost 0, and as an additional cost, you can banish X number of cards from your soul, and target attack gains plus X. So, if you've got a massive soul that you've set up in the early game, you can be giving an attack huge amounts of damage. And the other thing with Beacon of Victory as well is that if you've charged in that turn, so if you've charged this turn, you can search your deck for an action card with cost X or less, so equal to the cards you banish, and then put it straight into your hand. And as of course, if you've charged, if you've given that extra attack, so greater than space attack, Ser Boltyn can give go again. So you've got this card that really tells you to use your soul, to amass your soul, and to use it, which is that's a real theme through Ser Boltyn, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it might even be a theme for light in general, right? Because we look at Celestial Cataclysm. I mean, you're gonna have to have 3 cards in your soul, and then the tome as well. Like, you're right. Building up the soul is a resource that you're kind of investing in for the later game or the later turns. And then on the flip side, we immediately see shadow cards that punish you for doing that, right?
It's the opposites, right? It's the shadow and the light is complete opposites in the game design as well, which is great to see how thematically on trend they've kept it.
Yeah, and I quickly just want to talk about some of the weapons that we'll be seeing in limited format. Specifically, it's going to be he has 2 axes, 2 one-handed axes. It's Hatchet of Mind and Hatchet of Body. So Hatchet of Mind reads once per turn action, 1 resource, attack. Whenever you attack with Hatchet of Mind, if Hatchet of Body was the last attack this turn, Hatchet of Mind gains +1 until end of turn, and it swings for 2. So Hatchet of Body is literally just a direct mirror of that. So you basically understand both by this. So if we're looking at Ser Boltyn in limited, or obviously could be in constructed as well, you're going to have to make the choice on the weapon. But looks like we're trying to come in with these hatchets and get go again, swing with them multiple times. How are we going to do that, Hayden?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of in some ways a little bit inbuilt in the fact that the first one is the tough one, right? Because as soon as you attack with the second one, whether it be the Hatchet of Body or the Hatchet of Mind, it's going to see the last one and get that +1 attack. And because it then has that +1 attack, you're higher than your base attack, and you can use Ser Boltyn, right? So you can actually start to really, go wide with these. You could go 1 axe into second axe into an attack action. But what we need to, I guess, first see is how do you give that first one go again, right? Like that's a bit of the challenge. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure on how we're going to give the first one go again from the cards we've seen so far. Attack reactions would be my first thought, and we have seen a couple of attack reactions. Yeah, what about you? How do you think that might play out?
Yeah, I mean, so if we're looking at this, I'm trying to find the card real quick, but I'm kind of in the same boat as you, right? Like, how are we going to be giving this first attack on Sir Boltyn's Chane go again? Whether that is the hatchet or it is an attack action, right? Because with the attack actions, we want to be using that action to charge, because there's many cards that actually, if you've charged this turn, they get a bonus, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't seen many cards that charge and have go again on this, on the same card, right? So obviously you don't want to just be, swinging for, 3 and then charging a card and then that's the end of your turn. You might want to be going wide with these things. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, kind of what you think will enable us to do that, and also how we're going to be able to do it in limited. Like, how does this class play out in a limited format? So kind of forget about some of these signpost majestics.
Yeah, well, okay, so you just said about, using 2 cards or to attack, charge plus, so use that card into your soul plus attack. That's not the worst thing to be doing, I think, in the early game. If you're sort of amassing your soul and charging it up, and you can be using your other cards to defend out what your opponent's doing. So there are some cards that, come in for 4 off 0 cost and can charge your soul. Like, that's not the worst thing to be doing. I mean, it's not super exciting, but you are getting, starting to amass your resources of your soul while also presenting some damage. And, you can use your other cards to defend out what your opponent's doing. But I think in terms of the ways to get the go again on your first attack, I think it has to come from either attack reactions or non-attack actions that buff up your attack or your weapon. So I know we were saying, maybe the signpost majestics, but I want to go back to one of those and Spill Blood. So Spill Blood is a majestic at red, costs 1, and says axes you control gain +2 attack and dominate until end of turn, go again. So that's a way where we can, buff up these axes, make them bigger, and then we can use Ser Boltyn's attack reaction to give them go again because of the higher than base attack. So there's one way to do it, right? Like, there is ways to do it, and there is attack actions from previous sets, like Nature's Path Pilgrimage or whatever it might be, Warrior's Valor. There's ways to give attacks go, higher attack to then use Ser Boltyn.
Yeah, so I see your Spill Blood, but then I raise you a V of the Vanguard at rare. So we will see this one in limited. So V of the Vanguard is a rare Boltyn specialization, yellow 1 cost, and it says, as an additional cost by V of the Vanguard, you may charge your hero soul any number of times, right? And then attacks you control this combat chain gain +1 for each light card you've charged this way. So not only are you feeding that soul, which you've hopefully by this point put some cards into, but your attacks will be getting +1, so you'll inherently be able to use Boltyn's ability. And this is at rare.
This card's really good. Yeah, I think I also like this card's at rare, so that it's going to have, as you say, some impact on the limited format. But one thing to know as well is it's attacks you control in the combat chain gain +1 for each light card charged this way. So it's not just one. If you charge multiple cards as you can with the Vanguard, you could be giving attacks +2 for the turn. And because you're going to give this, it also sees itself, so it buffs itself. So if you give the +1 or the +2 to the Vanguard, you can then use the attack reaction from Ser Boltyn, and then you can be coming in with, X plus X for 4 and 5 damage. Like, it's pretty significant what you can put out with something like the Vanguard. So I think this is a big card for Ser Boltyn and for the Light Warrior class.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to kind of circle back to, I guess, another majestic card that we did have spoiled very recently that has massive implication. I know we talked about Hatchet of Mind, Hatchet of Bodies, so let's talk about Raiden Dustbang. So Raiden Dustbang is a 2-handed sword, light warrior weapon, and it says once per turn action, 0 cost, attack. And the text reads, if you've charged this turn, Raiden gains +3 attack, and it starts at 0 attack. So what are the implications of this card, Hayden? How do you see it working?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you definitely have to charge to turn it on, right? So the max it can get from, it's just a once effect. So if you've charged multiple turns, you don't get multiple instances of a +3. It's just if you've charged this turn, Raiden gains +3. So you can get this attack to 3 and it costs 0, which is great return, right? 0 for a 3-cost attack. Where I think we're going to see this card come to, I guess its full realization is with some of the cards, other cards we've seen but haven't necessarily talked about, like Glisten. So Glisten is a light instant, at 2 cost. Says distribute up to 4 +1 attack counters among any number of weapons you control. And at the beginning of your end phase, remove all of the +1 counters from weapons you control. So you can give something like Raiden, the +4, and then using a card that we've seen in Crucible, Twinning Blade, you can actually, Twinning Blade that card, give it a go again with Ser Boltyn, come in. Like, there's all these really big sort of turns you can set up with Raiden that are a lot more sort of, I guess, go tall orientated, so a bit more what we've seen with Dorinthia than what we might necessarily see with what this class feels like it wants to do primarily with the hatchets. But again, that comes back to 2 ways to build, or multiple ways to build a class, right? You don't have to necessarily have this really go wide, charge the soul setup deck. You can actually have this sort of more Raiden-based deck as well, which is, super interesting, I think.
Hayden, how can you read Glisten like that and leave out the most interesting part? So let's go through Glisten one more time. Right. Distribute up to 4 +1 counters among any number of weapons you control. Normal, right? Normal stuff. We expect this. At the beginning of your end phase, remove all +1 counters from weapons you control. Okay. Yeah. But there's some text here, Hayden, right?
I omitted it.
It says in parentheses, if a permanent is no longer a weapon during your end phase, +1 counters on it are not removed. What the heck does that mean?
Yeah, well, sorry, I did leave that out, but you need to show me how that interacts with anything in the current format.
I think it's maybe telling us what might come in the future, right? So we have Blastment, we have Ursa for our Shadow heroes. I'm assuming there's maybe something for this light here where this text is relevant, or maybe it's just relevant, in kingdoms or a set after that. But I mean, it is something to, like, when you read that, you're like, wait, what the heck is this?
Kind of scares me, to be honest.
Yeah, because you just look at it, you're like, okay, I mean, obviously it's put on here because it's just, whenever they write text like that, it's because the interaction is not, a lot of players would make mistakes, right? They would take the +1 counters off. So there's obviously going to be this thing that is a weapon during your turn, but before your end phase becomes like an aura or an item. Like what is? I'm so confused.
That's very interesting. Yeah, for sure. So I thought maybe what we could do is, there's a couple other key cards I think for the Light Warrior and for Boltyn that I want to talk about. But I thought maybe just before we talk about some of those cards, we just kind of, I guess, bring together or recap what we feel it is that Ser Boltyn is trying to do and wants to do as a playstyle for a class. So I guess what I really see, and I want to go back to it because I think it's going to be super important, is that Ser Boltyn really feels like a hero, and this Light Warrior as a class feels like someone that wants to use these attack actions early. So we've got some attack actions that have, as an additional cost, or when you play them, you get to charge your soul. As you go through the game, playing these attack actions early, maybe getting in with a weapon hit here or there, but you're not necessarily focused on setting up huge, really big turns early on. You're focused on amassing these resources. And then into the mid-game, a lot of Ser Boltyn and the Light Warrior classes, really, I guess, marquee cards, like V of the Vanguard we saw, Lumina Ascension that we haven't even we haven't talked about that yet. These are both yellow cards, so these can be pitched early for resources. They both defend for 3 as well. You can defend with them if needs be. But if you pitch them, you get them back into the deck, and you can set them up for late game. And that's kind of where I really see Boltyn's kind of core playstyle, I think, is setting up these cards into the end game once you've amassed your soul and beefed it out to a certain extent. Would you agree, disagree, Brendan, on that kind of, I guess, first initial take of Boltyn's playstyle?
Yeah, so I 100% agree with you, especially with the card pool we've had spoiled to us so far. It doesn't look like there's much, you won't have too much availability to be charging that soul and getting go again and just going wide and playing out your hand and just blasting the opponent from the start of the game. It does very much look like a deck where you're going to be feeding that soul as a resource and then kind of developing this mid-game plan where you are going to use that soul to pressure your opponent, and then obviously for the end game as well, close it out with some big attack with either using Spill Blood or kind of a myriad of cards to do so. Yeah.
And so on that, I mean, let's talk about some of the other cards that we haven't spoken about. I wouldn't mind starting. This is structured a little bit like how we feel this game plays out. There's some of these attack actions that allow you to charge a soul I think are super interesting. So, for instance, Engulfing Light, which is a Light Warrior action attack. It's at common, so it's a cycle. And the red attacks for 3 and defense for 3. It says, as an additional cost to play Engulfing Light, you may charge your hero's soul. If you've charged this turn, Engulfing Light gains, if this hits, put it into your hero's soul. So I think Engulfing Light is a really interesting one because you can potentially have this charge your hero soul twice, right? With the card that you put in as the cost, but then also if you hit with Engulfing Light, you can be in a position to get this into your soul. And it has 3 attacks, so it can be defended out by 1 card. But if your opponent is playing, predominantly attack actions or defends with an attack action, Boltyn's going to give this Engulfing Light +1 attack naturally, which is going to make it hard to defend out.
Yeah, I can literally already feel myself getting irritated playing against this because you look at Ser Boltyn's cards and all of the reds deal 3 damage, right? So you have to think that the majority of the time when my opponent's blocking this is going to be 4, so that really annoying +1. So another card here is going to be Bolt of Courage. It's a red 0 cost, so it's a common as a cycle. It says as an additional cost to play Bolt of Courage, you may charge your hero soul. So good, right? And if you've charged your hero soul this turn, Bolt of Courage gains, if it hits, draw a card. So coming in for 3, can also defend for 3 as well. But like Hayden said, if it's blocked in such a way, it's going to be for 4.
Mm-hmm. And then it comes down to, I think, how is there ways to give these plus attack or to help you trigger the attack reaction of Boltyn. Maybe not necessarily in the early game because we know we might want to be just amassing soul, but sometimes you're going to have these 4 or 5 card hands because your opponent's going to take a turn off, or it could be a matchup where they take a turn off. They're not looking to actively be aggressive on their turn, so you're going to often have big hands. How do you utilize that if you don't have natural go again? I think that comes down to attack reactions in a big way. So we've seen 1 Light Warrior attack reaction so far in Courageous Steel Hand. So that's at red, it's a 0 cost. If you've charged this turn, target attack gains +3. So not target weapon. It's not like what we've seen with Dorinthia ones. It's just target attack. So playing this on an Engulfing Light to get it to 6 or 7 if they've defended with an attack action card, then allows you to also trigger Boltyn's attack reaction after this, because now the attack is higher than the base attack. So I think we're going to see attack reactions play into Boltyn's arsenal, at least in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And a card you mentioned earlier as well that we hadn't gotten around to talking about yet was Lumina Ascension. So that's going to be a Majestic. It's a yellow, 0 cost, and it's a Boltyn specialization. So ideally, most likely kind of a signpost here, right? And it says, until end of turn, weapons you control gain +1. And if this hits, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a light card, put it into your hero's soul and gain a life. Otherwise, put it at the bottom of your deck. And it says, if you've charged this turn, you may attack an additional time with each weapon you control. And this has go again.
Yeah, this card kind of does it all, right? I think it's there's a reason I kind of avoided talking about this card earlier. I think there's just a lot to process, and I think this is one of those cards where I think it's really mid to end game orientated. Effectively with just this 1 card at 0 cost, you can be in a position where you get to attack with your weapons, twice each, so 4 times in total with the hatchets. If you have 3 cards in your soul. So this card, if you started to charge up your soul, it's going to be massive. And there's some really big things you can do with this card in conjunction with Spilled Blood. You can give get your first attack to be a 5, your second attack to be a 6, your third attack 6, your fourth attack 7. That's already significant damage, and that's without adding in any extra cards around that. So Lumina Ascension to me really feels like this card that's going to, in the mid game, help you deliver quite a big turn. And we know it can even help you refuel your soul with the on-hit effects of the Lumina Ascension. Until end of turn, weapons gain +1. But they also get, if this hits, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a light card, put it into your hero's soul. And in the end game, you can just have these massive turns with Lumina Ascension, Spilled Blood, plus a couple of other cards to really push it home.
Yeah, 100%. And just kind of looking at it from a macro perspective as well, if we move to sort of a constructed mindset or a blitz mindset, do you think in Ser Boltyn we're playing Refraction Bolters? Are we playing Snapdragon Scalers? Or maybe we're playing this new Valiant Dynamo card? And just quickly, so everybody knows, Valiant Dynamo is the new Warrior Equipment Legs. It's a legendary, and it says, at the beginning of your end phase, if you have attacked 2 or more times with weapons this turn, you may remove a -1 counter from Valiant Dynamo. It has Battle Worn. So that means if you defend with Valiant Dynamo, put a -1 counter on it when the combat chain closes. So basically what this is saying is that if you're swinging 2 or more times, you're going to be able to block with this leg piece multiple times throughout a game, right?
Yeah, I see Valiant Dynamo blocking a lot of Kadachis in games.
Yep, blocking a lot of 4 attacks and just irritating everybody else who's trying to play on-hit triggers, right?
Yeah, this card is definitely, Valiant Dynamo, definitely a very strong piece of equipment. It's a legendary as well, so it's pretty clear they haven't really printed poor legendary so far, right? Like, at the rarity of that, it's going to be at least reasonable. And this card's good. Is it the league equipment that you play? It could be matchup dependent, I think. So I think if Snapdragon Scalers is something that could be potentially really important for these big turns in the mid game. You play a card that charges your soul, and then you use Snapdragon Scalers to give it a go again. So you're not using a card from hand to then start these big weapon turns while still having full cards in hand apart from that charge card and the attack action. So that could be one. Refraction Bolters, I'm not as excited about in Boltyn as I think it's a staple in Dorinthia, definitely. But when you've got the hatchets and you're going wide, I don't think it's as applicable. Maybe if you're playing Raiden, it ends up being something you definitely want. But because you don't have Dorinthia's ability to attack, Dorinthia says, if you hit with your weapon, you can attack with it an additional time this turn. So Boltyn doesn't have that effect, right? So you need another way to get that, whether it be through Lumina Ascension or Twinning Blade as well.
Yeah, I mean, seeing both Raiden and Valiant Dynamo makes me wonder if there is going to be an archetype for Control Warrior coming out as a possible deck build. I don't see the deck clearly at this point, mostly because there is like a significant lack of. I don't see the chip damage, right? That's what we see out of Control Katsu with the Kadachis or the Ira that was tearing through Blitz early in the season, or and there's also not this factor of like OTK, right? So if we look at like Runeblade OTK, it does this massive amount of damage at the end. So yeah, I mean, Raiden definitely has me thinking, along with seeing Valiant Dynamo, but I don't know. I feel like I always just try to look at aggressive decks and turn them into control decks nowadays.
Yeah. So I guess before we wrap up, Ser Boltyn and the pod today, is there any other cards you want to talk about for Ser Boltyn in Monarch, or even outside of Monarch, that you think Ser Boltyn's going to be looking at as potential includes in a deck to start with?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we talked about earlier as well, like potentially playing Twinning Blade in this deck, so getting that ability to swing again. It just seems like a potentially very, very strong card, right?
Yep, definitely. There's a few other cards I think of. So I actually wanted one card we didn't speak about in Monarch is, and I think it's quite interesting because of just what it does with that sort of overall game plan, especially in the early game, is Valiant Thrust. So Valiant Thrust is a light warrior action attack at red. So it's a rare, so it's a cycle. At red, costs 1, attacks for 4, and it says if you've charged this turn, Valiant Thrust gains +3. So I'm really interested about this card. Is there ways that we're going to see, some just charge naturally? Is there a way you can charge with off attack actions? It doesn't seem like there will be. It makes thematical sense that it'd be on attack actions. But this is a card where, you can come in with one charge card and then play Valiant Thrust and be coming in for 7 for 1 resource. Like, that's a huge return, right? So I'm interested to see how Valiant Thrust will be played and constructed. In Limited, I think this card is, really, really strong. But how are we going to see this card utilized and constructed, if at all?
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of Push the Point, right? So, but obviously blocks a bit better because I'm assuming it's slightly harder to get off.
Yeah, it's defense of 3, but is it a bit harder to set up than just dealing damage for sure. And the other card I want to talk about was Push Forward. So Push Forward is a non-attack action from Crucible. If people haven't seen this, it costs 1, and it says the next weapon attack this turn gains +3, so that's at red. And if you've attacked with a weapon this turn, your next attack this turn gains Dominate. So quite interesting, I think, in a potentially go wide Ser Boltyn deck that is, kind of what we're looking at. This 1 cost that gives a buff and also gives Dominate is really interesting. So that could be a card that we might see as well.
Yeah, I know we saw it in Kasai, in Skirmish as well. But yeah, I mean, just to like quickly glance over like all these heroes that exposed so far, there's just so many options when it comes to what equipment and what weapons you're going to be running. So if you talk about Levia, you're thinking about Hexagore, you're thinking about Ravenous Meat Axe, and then you also have the club, you have claws. I mean, and then obviously like with Chane, we have the Nebula Bait, like all of this. There's just so many choices, and I think that's just really expanding the potentials of these decks and the kind of the deck building challenge that we all face is players of the game.
It's one of the things that's getting me most excited about Flesh and Blood as a game. We've got to the fourth set now. There's so many options for deck building. These decks are going to start looking a lot different. The metagame, I think, is going to start developing and changing a lot because there's more options to attack certain decks as well. So yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on some cards in 2 weeks' time and actually start building out some of these decks. Take it to local armor events, try out some things that are probably going to be pretty bad, but I'm excited to try them out and see how they go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that last hero, whatever it is, I'm just gonna commit myself to it right now. Commit myself to the unknown. I'll be the illusionist, or maybe I get forced to play Light Guardian. Who knows?
So everyone's heard it here. Brendan is saying that he's definitely going to play the hero that we haven't seen yet. But again, Brendan, by the time this pod comes out, everyone else has probably seen it, and they're probably laughing at you right now, or they're saying this guy's a genius. He's picked the right class. If
it's Light Ranger, I'll just retire. Oh, I know there's a lot of Azalea fans out there. We'll get there eventually, guys. We'll get there.
Cool.
So those are the heroes so far, and that concludes our second week of Arsenal Pass. Just to quickly remind you, next week we are doing that limited prep podcast. So that's going to be all of the commons, all of the rares, and basically, just kind of general tips on how to play the classes, what you're going to be looking for when you're building your sealed pool, maybe what heroes might be easier to play than others, and just general strategy on how to kind of win those pre-release events that you're going to. So stay on the lookout for that next week. And then, just heading off. Hayden, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I just again can't wait until pre-release. We're now 9 days out as we record this pod.
We've crazy.
Seen, I know, right? We've seen a lot of the set. I just so excited for the new set and then to get to construct it afterwards.
Oh man, I'm so hyped for draft. It's gonna be crazy. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm just like, this is the most excited I've ever been for like any game release. So I don't know. I can't put words into it. And then Hayden, I know you're headed on a little trip tomorrow, by the way.
Yeah, I'm fortunately going to be heading back to New Zealand. So originally from New Zealand, but I live in Australia. I'm going home for 2 weeks to see family. Really fortunate that able to do so with the travel bubble open here in the South Pacific and Oceania with Australia and New Zealand. So I get to go see my parents and friends and family, which is great. So we're doing the pod next week from back home.
Perfect. And I know I'll be out there to see you and see Sasha in New Zealand hopefully soon when everything opens back up. Just can't wait to get back. And yeah, with that, if you guys are interested in playing in the Flesh and Blood Discord Gauntlet, after this week, we actually are going to be taking off both pre-release and release weekend, just so people can get all of those games in get as many games in as possible at their local stores, and really just hit it hard with like either constructed or maybe a kind of a sealed format. So we'll be taking 2 weeks off, but definitely stay on the lookout for when we do come back, and we're playing with Monarch cards, which I'm excited for. I just can't wait. But yeah, that concludes our episode 2 of Arsenal Pass, and see you next week.
Bye.